The hanging woman Jonah Blackwood discovered on his newly purchased ranch wasn't quite dead, which complicated everything. A faint pulse beneath his fingers meant choice rather than circumstance. 3 years hiding from his past had led him here, a desolate corner of Dakota Territory where he'd spent his last dollars on land that looked nothing like the agent's description. Now the property came with an unexpected occupant and trouble that wasn't his to shoulder. He should ride for the law, but something in the woman's face stopped him. Rope burns circled her neck like a grim necklace. "Amos Slade," she whispered when her eyes flickered open. The same man who'd sold Jonah this forsaken piece of earth just 1 week before. Her cracked lips formed words that would shatter his hard-won peace. "They'll be here by week's end. Slade's men don't ride away empty-handed." Jonah's fingers found his knife handle. Jonah faces the choice we all dread: walk away from someone else's trouble or risk everything for a stranger. 3 years running from his past, only to have it catch up on land he purchased to escape. What would you do? Would you cut down the woman and invite her troubles, or leave her fate to others? Comment below with your choice, and follow for the next chapter where Jonah's decision changes everything. Some wounds can only heal when we stop running from them. Jonah Blackwood leaned forward in his saddle, studying the weathered buildings that represented his last chance at peace. The Dakota Territory stretched behind him like the years he'd spent running, vast, unforgiving, and impossible to take back. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across what was supposed to be his new beginning, revealing peeling paint and sagging porches the land agent had conveniently failed to mention. "Place is half dead," he muttered to his horse, a dun gelding that had carried him through 3 states and more nightmares than he cared to count. The animal's ears twitched in response, perhaps the only creature that had heard Jonah's voice in weeks. He adjusted the rifle in its saddle holster, a habit from days when his vigilance had mattered to someone besides himself. The scar running from temple to jaw pulled tight as he frowned. Another reminder of debts paid in blood and promises that hadn't been kept. A broken fence line marked what should have been the northern pasture. Beyond it, a creek glinted in the dying light. Water, at least, though everything else looked like a fool's bargain. The kind a desperate man makes when his options have narrowed to nothing. Jonah had spent his last dollars on this place, selling everything that remained from his previous life. The ranch was meant to be far enough from anywhere that memories couldn't find him, isolated enough that he wouldn't have to explain the shadows that sometimes crossed his face when certain words were spoken. He nudged the gelding forward, dust rising from the trail that wound toward the main house. Something wasn't right. Fresh tracks cut across the yard. Boot prints, multiple men, no more than a day old. Jonah's hand drifted to his revolver, muscle memory from a life he'd tried to leave behind. Someone had been here, recently, and Jonah Blackwood had paid good money to be left alone. The tracks led past the main house toward a massive oak that dominated the eastern clearing. Jonah approached cautiously, eyes scanning for movement, the weight of his Colt .45, a cold comfort against his hip. Years of vigilance weren't easily abandoned, even when their purpose was gone. He saw the gallows first, not a proper structure, but a thick branch with a rope thrown over it, the kind of hasty justice frontier men sometimes delivered when law was too distant or too disinterested. Then he saw her. A woman hung suspended, toes barely brushing the ground, hands bound behind her back. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins to curtain a face turned downward. Dead, he assumed, until a slight movement caught his eye. Her chest rose with a shallow breath. "Damn it all," Jonah muttered, dismounting in a fluid motion that belied his 42 years. He drew his knife and approached, noting the signs of a struggle in the disturbed earth. Multiple horses, men standing around to watch. A deliberate spectacle. He tested the edge of his blade against his thumb before reaching up to cut the rope. The woman collapsed against him, a dead weight that wasn't quite dead. Up close, he could see the angry welts where the rope had cut into her neck, the bruises on what he could see of her face. Jonah laid her gently on the ground, checking for a pulse, faint but present. He loosened the rope around her neck, revealing raw flesh beneath. "This ain't my business," he told himself, even as he checked her for other injuries. "Not my fight, not my problem." But he was already lifting her, carrying her toward the house he'd bought for solitude, now invaded by a stranger's troubles and the violence that seemed to follow him no matter how far he ran. The cabin's interior matched its exterior, neglected, dusty, abandoned in haste. Jonah laid the woman on the single cot, his own bedroll still tied to his saddle outside. He found a canteen and dampened a cloth, cleaning dirt from the rope burns encircling her neck. She couldn't have been hanging long, an hour, maybe less. Whoever had strung her up had likely assumed the job finished, not bothering to confirm their work. An amateur's mistake, or perhaps mercy disguised as carelessness. Her eyelids flickered as he worked, then opened suddenly, dark eyes alert with fear, then narrowed with recognition of her situation. She tried to speak, coughed instead, each spasm a fresh agony across her face. "Don't talk," Jonah said, offering water. "Rope did a number on your throat." She drank slowly, studying him with wary calculation. When she finally spoke, her voice was a rasp of gravel and determination. "You're Blackwood, the one who bought this place." Jonah stiffened. "How'd you know that?" "Saw the deed." Another sip of water, another wince of pain. Amos Slade's handwriting, recognizable. The name landed like a stone in still water, ripples of recognition spreading outward. "Slade sold me this ranch," Jonah said slowly, "week ago in Millfield." A bitter smile twisted her cracked lips. "Then we've both been cheated by the same man." She touched her throat gingerly. "I'm Sadie Kane. Slade framed me for theft when I wouldn't sell him my saloon. This was his way of settling accounts." Jonah stood, creating distance between them. "That's unfortunate, but—" "They'll be here by week's end," she cut in, voice stronger now. "Slade's men don't ride away empty-handed. They're coming to collect this land for debts you don't even know you owe." Jonah's fingers found the grip of his knife as he weighed choices, narrowing by the second. Morning light filtered through dusty windows, illuminating Sadie Kane as she sat at the rickety table, fingers pressed against her bruised throat. Jonah returned from the well, setting a bucket of fresh water before her without meeting her eyes. "You need to leave," he said, the words hanging between them like smoke. "Whatever trouble Slade brought you, I can't afford to take it on." Sadie's laugh was a harsh whisper. "And where exactly should I go?" She gestured at her tattered dress, the rope burns on her neck. "Slade's men control the territory for 50 miles. They see me on the road, they'll finish what they started." Jonah busied himself with his saddlebags, laying out meager supplies. 3 years of drifting had taught him to travel light, carry only necessities, nothing to spare for a stranger's problems. "I paid good money for this land," he said finally. "My last money." "Then you've got more reason than most to stand and fight." Sadie rose unsteadily, pride straightening her spine despite her injuries. "I managed a saloon for 5 years in Millfield. I can cook, clean, shoot straight, and I know Slade's methods better than anyone." Jonah studied her, the determination in her eyes belying the weakness in her limbs, the way she leaned against the table for support she'd never admit needing. "1 week," he conceded grudgingly, "until you're well enough to travel. Then you go your way, I go mine." Sadie nodded, a barely perceptible dip of her chin. "Fair enough. But if Slade's collectors come before then, you'll want another gun at your side. I don't plan on shooting anybody." "That's the trouble with plans," Sadie said, her voice strengthening. "Slade doesn't much respect them." Between them settled the uneasy quiet of a truce neither fully trusted, an alliance born of necessity rather than choice, temporary as morning dew, fragile as new ice. By midday, they'd assessed the property, Jonah leading his horse with Sadie walking beside him, each step a visible effort she refused to acknowledge. The main house needed work, roof patched, windows resealed, porch steps replaced. The barn stood in better condition, suggesting the previous owner had prioritized livestock over personal comfort. "Creek runs year-round," Sadie noted as they followed its winding course. "Fed from mountain snowmelt. Doesn't dry up even in August." Jonah nodded. The water was clear and sweet-tasting, cutting through his property before continuing southward. He'd chosen this land for isolation, not resources, but good water meant survival. "Slade didn't just cheat you on the buildings," Sadie said, stopping to rest against a boulder. "He sold you something worth far more than you paid." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "Meaning?" "This creek. It feeds 3 other ranches downstream before reaching Millfield." She traced the water's path in the air. "Whoever controls the headwaters controls everything that depends on them." Understanding dawned slowly. That's why he wants the land back. "Control the water, control the territory," Sadie confirmed. "Slade's been buying up every creek and stream he can find. Some folks refused to sell, so suddenly they had debts they couldn't pay." She touched her neck reflexively. "Or worse." Jonah stared at the innocent-looking water, seeing it through new eyes. Not just sustenance, but power. Not just property, but purpose. "There's good soil here," he said after a while, changing the subject. "Could grow something besides trouble." A ghost of a smile touched Sadie's lips. "Been a while since I've seen anything grow worth keeping." The unspoken question lingered between them. Was this place, this unexpected alliance, something worth fighting for? Neither had the answer yet, but the water kept flowing, indifferent to their doubts. The rider appeared just before sunset, a solitary figure against the darkening sky. Jonah spotted him from the barn, where he'd been taking inventory of usable tools. He motioned to Sadie, who stood in the doorway of the main house. "Company," he said quietly. She disappeared inside without a word. Moments later, she emerged with a shotgun Jonah hadn't known was there. Her handling of the weapon spoke of familiarity, born from necessity rather than choice. The rider approached at an unhurried pace, a lean man with a face weathered by sun and hardship. His clothes were trail-dusty, but of good quality, his horse well-fed and groomed. Not a drifter, then, someone with means and purpose. "Afternoon," the man called, stopping at a respectful distance. "Name's Mercer, representing Mr. Amos Slade's interests." Jonah stepped forward, keeping his stance relaxed, his hand deliberately away from his revolver. "Jonah Blackwood, this is my land, bought and paid for." Mercer's smile never reached his eyes. "About that payment, Mr. Blackwood. Seems there's been some confusion regarding previous liens against this property. Mr. Slade sent me to collect the outstanding balance." "Already paid Slade in full," Jonah replied evenly. "Got the deed to prove it." "That's unfortunate," Mercer said, his hand moving casually toward his coat. Because I have paperwork showing. The unmistakable sound of a shotgun being cocked cut through the evening air. Sadie stood on the porch, weapon steady despite her injuries. "Your paperwork against our guns," she called, voice stronger than it had been that morning. "Poor odds, Mercer." The collector's eyes narrowed, measuring distances and chances. After a long moment, he tipped his hat. "I'll inform Mr. Slade of your position. Good evening to you both." As Mercer rode away, Jonah turned to Sadie. "You made us an enemy today." "He was already your enemy," she replied. "Now he knows you're not alone." Before Jonah could respond, a messenger rode up, dust-covered and nervous. "Telegram for the property owner," he called, holding out an official-looking envelope. "Notice regarding water rights claims filed in the territorial office." They set out at dawn, the territorial office notice folded in Jonah's pocket like a challenge. The trip to Millfield would take most of the day, enough time for wounds to ache and doubts to fester. "Slade's filing claim on the creek water," Jonah said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving the ranch. "Says he's got prior rights through some company I never heard of." Sadie adjusted her position in the saddle of the spare horse Jonah had found in the barn. Her bruises had deepened to purple. The rope burns raw despite the salve she'd applied. "Dakota Water Trust," she said, voice stronger than the day before. "It's his shell company, uses it to file claims on every water source in the territory." The trail wound through scrubland, rocky outcroppings, providing the only shade from the strengthening sun. Jonah kept a watchful eye on the horizon, aware that open country made them visible for miles. "You know a lot about Slade's operations," he observed, neither accusation nor compliment. "5 years running a saloon, you hear things." Sadie's laugh held no humor. "Men talk when they drink, especially men who work for someone like Slade. Bragging about their boss's power makes them feel important." "And what did Slade say when you wouldn't sell to him?" Her silence stretched long enough that Jonah thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its edge. That a woman had no business owning property men wanted. That everything has a price, if not in dollars, then in blood. They rode on, two outcasts heading toward a town neither called home, connected by a common enemy and little else. Millfield appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a cluster of wooden buildings shimmering in the afternoon heat. The town had grown since Jonah last passed through, new construction evidence of the prosperity that always followed frontier expansion. As they rode down the main street, Jonah noted the glances, the whispers. Small towns had long memories, and strangers were always noticed. Beside him, Sadie sat straighter in her saddle, chin raised despite the visible marks on her neck. Pride, Jonah recognized, the kind that keeps a person standing when everything else fails. "General store first," Jonah muttered. "Need supplies." Inside Wilcox's general store, the cool air smelled of coffee, leather, and dried goods. A stout woman with graying hair watched them from behind the counter, eyes widening at the sight of Sadie. "Lord have mercy," she breathed. "Sadie Kane. We heard you were—" "Dead," Sadie supplied, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Not for lack of trying, Eleanor." Eleanor Wilcox moved around the counter, her initial shock giving way to genuine concern. "Who did this to you, girl?" "Same man who's buying up half the territory," Sadie replied. "We need supplies, Eleanor, and information." The storekeeper's eyes flicked to Jonah, questioning. "Jonah Blackwood," he introduced himself. "Bought the old Peterson place." Recognition dawned in Eleanor's expression. "Peterson didn't sell that land. He disappeared owing Slade money." She lowered her voice. You'd best speak with Moses Freeman, blacksmith shop at the end of town. He knows more than most about Slade's dealings. As they gathered supplies, Jonah noticed the whispers continuing outside the store window. Word traveled fast in places like Millfield. Slade has men in town, Sadie murmured. The tall one by the saloon, another across the street pretending to read a notice. Then we'd best make this visit quick, Jonah replied, paying Eleanor for their goods. Starting with your blacksmith friend. Moses Freeman's blacksmith shop rang with the rhythm of hammer on metal, sparks flying as the massive man shaped a horseshoe on his anvil. Sweat gleamed on his dark skin, testament to both the forge's heat and decades of hard labor. He paused when they entered, setting aside his hammer with deliberate care. "Miss Sadie," he acknowledged, his deep voice carrying no surprise at seeing a woman supposedly dead. His eyes moved to Jonah, assessing. "And you'd be the new owner of Peterson's place." "Word travels fast," Jonah noted. "Small towns run on gossip and grudges." Moses wiped his hands on his leather apron. "Both in good supply lately." Sadie stepped forward. "Moses, what do you know about the Dakota Water Trust?" The blacksmith's expression darkened. "Slade's pet project. Been filing claims on every creek and stream feeding the valley. Man who controls water controls everything that needs it." "He's filed against my property," Jonah said. "Land I already paid for." Typical Slade. Moses moved to close the shop door, checking the street before continuing. "He's planning to dam the creek that runs through your land. Control the flow downstream. Charge ranchers for what nature's always provided free." Before Jonah could respond, the shop door swung open. Amos Slade stood framed in the doorway, flanked by two men whose hands rested too casually near their weapons. Tall and rail-thin, Slade wore the smile of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Well now," he drawled, "if it isn't the ghost of Sadie Kane and her new protector." His pale eyes moved to Jonah. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe we have business matters to discuss." "Nothing to discuss," Jonah replied evenly. "I paid for that land, fair and square." Slade's smile never wavered. "Yet you neglected to address the outstanding water rights claims filed well before your purchase. An unfortunate oversight." "Your claims are fabricated," Sadie interrupted, voice tight with anger. "Just like the theft charges you used to steal my saloon." Slade's expression hardened. "Careful, Miss Kane. The law already believes you're a thief." "They might easily believe you're dangerous, too." The tension stretched taut as a hangman's rope, ready to snap. Blood dripped from Jonah's split lip as he guided his horse out of town, one eye swollen nearly shut. Beside him, Sadie rode in tight-lipped silence, her posture rigid with suppressed fury. The confrontation had ended predictably, Slade's men ensuring Jonah understood the cost of defiance through fists and boots, while their employer watched with clinical detachment. Only Moses Freeman's intervention had prevented worse, his massive presence and loaded shotgun convincing Slade that a public killing might draw unwanted attention. "You didn't have to fight them," Sadie said finally, as Millfield receded behind them. Jonah spat blood onto the trail. "Didn't much feel like a choice. It's what Slade wanted. To show everyone in town what happens to people who stand against him." The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they rode, Jonah's injuries throbbing with each step of his horse. When they stopped to water the animals at a small stream, Sadie dismounted and dampened her handkerchief. "Hold still," she ordered, cleaning the blood from his face with surprising gentleness. Head wounds always look worse than they are. Jonah winced, but didn't pull away. Speaking from experience, running a saloon isn't all pouring drinks and counting money. The ghost of a smile touched her lips before fading. "Moses slipped me something before we left. Said Slade's dam plans go beyond just your creek." She produced a folded paper from her pocket, a rough map showing the network of waterways throughout the valley, with X marks at strategic locations. "He's planning dams at every major junction," she explained. "Whoever controls these points controls every drop of water from here to the territorial border." Jonah studied the map, recognizing his property at the headwaters of the main creek system. No wonder Slade wanted it back. "This isn't just about my land anymore," he said quietly. "It never was," Sadie replied. "Slade doesn't want a ranch. He wants an empire." As they mounted to continue homeward, the shared knowledge settled between them, a bridge connecting their separate paths into a single road forward. 3 days passed in uneasy peace. Jonah's injuries faded from angry red to dull purple, matching the sunset as he worked to repair the barn's sagging roof. Below, Sadie stacked freshly cut shingles, her movements more fluid than when they'd first met. Recovery looked different on her, less in the healing of visible wounds than in the straightening of her spine, the deliberate squaring of her shoulders. "Hand me that hammer," Jonah called, extending his arm without looking down. The tool smacked his palm with practiced precision. They'd developed a rhythm these past days, working together without unnecessary words, each anticipating the other's needs with growing accuracy. Not friendship, Jonah reminded himself. Necessity, alliance against a common enemy. "Roof will hold through winter now," he observed, driving the last nail home. "Though might not be our problem by then." Sadie shaded her eyes, looking up at him. "Getting attached to the place?" Jonah grunted, unwilling to admit the truth, that for the first time in 3 years he'd been thinking beyond survival. The land had possibilities. The creek water ran sweet and clear. Seeds planted in that soil might actually grow. "Just saying we fixed something worth fixing," he muttered, climbing down the ladder. She handed him a canteen, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Creek's rising with the mountain snowmelt." "Another week. We could divert some for a garden plot." "Another week," Jonah echoed, the words hanging between them like their original agreement. 1 week, they'd said, for her to heal enough to leave. The unspoken question lingered as they surveyed their handiwork, the patched roof, the mended fence line, the cleared pathways between buildings. Improvements made by people planning to stay, not pass through. Before either could address it, something caught Jonah's eye, a flicker of movement on the distant ridge, a momentary glint of sunlight on metal. "Get inside," he said quietly, all warmth vanishing from his voice. "We've got company." They moved with the efficiency of those accustomed to crisis, gathering weapons and positioning themselves strategically. Jonah counted 6 riders approaching slowly down the ridge trail. Too many for a simple debt collection, too few for the law. "Slade's men," Sadie confirmed, checking the shotgun's load. Her hands were steady, her expression grim but focused. Mercer in front, Jackson and Boyer behind him, mean ones. Don't recognize the others. Jonah positioned himself at the front window, Winchester rifle resting against the sill. "How'd you learn to handle that shotgun?" 5 years running a saloon," she replied, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. "They'll burn the barn first. It's what Slade does, destroys what people build, makes them watch before offering terms." The riders had stopped just beyond rifle range, conferring. Tactical, not hesitant. Men with a plan, not hotheads looking for trouble. 8 shells for the Winchester," Jonah said, laying them out precisely. 12 for your shotgun, revolvers fully loaded." Against 6 men, it might be enough. Sadie positioned herself at the side window, angle covering the approach to the barn. If we're lucky. Jonah had never counted much on luck. 3 years ago, it had abandoned him completely, along with everything else he'd believed in. But looking at Sadie, a woman who'd survived her own hanging, made him reconsider. "They want us frightened," he said, "desperate enough to sign whatever Slade puts in front of us." "And if we don't?" The question hung between them as the riders began to spread out, moving to surround the property. Tactical. Practiced. "Then we show them the price of this land is higher than they're willing to pay," Jonah replied, raising the Winchester to his shoulder as the first rider moved into range. The first shot came as twilight gathered, a warning bullet kicking up dirt near the well. A voice followed, Mercer's, carrying across the yard. "Blackwood, come out and talk terms before this gets unpleasant." Jonah remained silent, tracking the speaker through his rifle sights. Beside him, Sadie's breathing was measured, controlled. "Last chance, Blackwood." Another shot, closer this time. When no response came, they made their move. 2 men rushed the barn, oil lamps in hand. Jonah's first shot dropped one, the Winchester's report echoing across the property. The second man threw his lamp against the barn wall before diving for cover. Flames licked up the dry wood with hungry eagerness. Sadie's shotgun boomed, forcing another rider back behind the water trough. Return fire shattered the window above her head, sending glass cascading over them both. "They're trying to flank us," Jonah warned, spotting movement around the side of the house. Sadie moved to the rear window, firing once to drive back a shadow, slipping toward the back door. The exchange continued. Disciplined shots from inside, wilder fire from the attackers. Men unused to resistance, Jonah realized. They'd expected surrender, not fight. A bullet splintered the doorframe inches from his head. He returned fire, gratified to hear a pained shout in response. But the barn was fully ablaze now, flames reaching skyward, illuminating the yard in hellish orange light. Heat radiated through the windows, smoke beginning to drift toward the house. "We need to move," Sadie urged. "House will catch next." Another exchange of fire, another attacker wounded. The odds were shifting, but the flames were spreading faster than their ammunition could drive off Slade's men. Then something unexpected, shouting among the attackers. Confusion. 2 horses bolting riderless into the darkness. A final volley of covering fire, then retreat. Ragged, disorganized, nothing like their calculated approach. Silence fell, broken only by the crackling inferno consuming the barn. Jonah and Sadie exchanged puzzled glances. "They're leaving?" she whispered, disbelief evident. Jonah moved cautiously to the shattered window, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. Something spooked them. As if in answer, a lone figure appeared at the edge of the property, hands raised in peaceful gesture. A man's voice called out, strangely familiar to Sadie, "Hello, the house! Don't shoot! I'm a friend!" "Jacob?" Sadie's voice cracked with disbelief as she lowered her shotgun. "Jacob Kane?" The man stepped into the firelight, revealing a face younger than Jonah had expected, mid-20s, with Sadie's dark eyes and determined jaw. He approached cautiously, keeping his hands visible. "It's me, Sadie. I heard what happened. Been tracking you since Millfield." Jonah kept his Winchester trained on the newcomer. "You know this man?" "My brother," Sadie whispered, emotion making her voice unsteady for the first time since Jonah had known her. "Thought he was dead. Slade told me they'd killed him when he couldn't pay his debts." Jacob Kane stopped a respectful distance from the house. "They nearly did. Kept me working in Slade's mine instead, paying off what I owed." His eyes reflected the burning barn. I escaped 3 days ago when I heard rumors you were alive." "Why'd Slade's men run?" Jonah demanded, not lowering his rifle. "I wasn't alone," Jacob explained. "Met some other fellows with grievances against Slade on my way here. They circled behind while I came up front. Slade's boys thought they were surrounded." Sadie pushed past Jonah, limping down the porch steps despite his protests. She approached her brother slowly, disbelief giving way to cautious hope. When she finally embraced him, Jonah looked away, feeling suddenly like an intruder. "Slade's bringing the law next time," Jacob said over his sister's shoulder, eyes meeting Jonah's. "Marshall's in his pocket. They'll come with papers, badges, and twice as many men." The barn collapsed in a shower of sparks and embers, illuminating the three figures standing amid the destruction of what Jonah and Sadie had begun to build. "He knows what you have," Jacob continued, "and he'll burn the whole territory down to get it." Dawn revealed the full extent of the destruction. The barn reduced to smoldering timbers, fence posts charred, and boot prints trampling the newly cleared garden plot. Jonah surveyed the damage with tight-lipped silence, while Sadie and her brother spoke in hushed tones by the well. 3 days had passed since Jacob Kane's unexpected arrival. 3 days of whispered conversations between siblings, furtive glances, and information that never quite aligned. Jacob claimed to know Slade's movements, supply shipments, patrol schedules, planned raids, all delivered with the confidence of someone with inside knowledge. "Slade's moving most of his men east," Jacob announced over breakfast, spreading a rough map across the table. "Territory judge is arriving next week. He's trying to secure legal backing before making another move on this place." Jonah studied the map, noting the patrol routes Jacob had marked. Something felt wrong. "How'd you come by this information?" "Made friends with one of Slade's clerks while working off my debt," Jacob explained smoothly. "Man drinks too much, talks too much." Sadie beamed at her brother with unguarded pride. Jacob always could charm information out of anyone. Jonah nodded noncommittally. According to Jacob's intelligence, Slade would send men along the North Ridge that afternoon, a perfect opportunity to observe their numbers without being seen. They spent the morning preparing defenses, positioning supplies at strategic points around the property. When midday came and went with no sign of riders on the North Ridge, Jacob shrugged it off easily. "Must have changed their plans. Happens all the time with Slade, unpredictable." But Jonah had noticed other discrepancies. Jacob's familiarity with the property, despite claiming he'd never been there, his detailed knowledge of Slade's operations that somehow never proved useful, and most troubling, the way his stories changed slightly with each telling. Watching brother and sister together, Jonah kept his doubts to himself, but he began watching Jacob Kane more carefully than the horizon. Evening brought a summer storm, heavy clouds gathering over the mountains before unleashing a torrent that extinguished the last of the barn's embers. Trapped indoors by the downpour, tension thickened the air like smoke. Jonah cleaned his rifle methodically at the table while Sadie prepared dinner, Jacob's easy chatter filling the silence between them. Stories of his time in Slade's mine, plans for rebuilding once the trouble passed, assurances that his contacts would warn them of any imminent danger. "Tomorrow, I'll ride into the East Valley," Jacob announced. "My friend should have news about the judge's arrival." Jonah looked up from his weapon. "Thought you said the East Road was watched." "South portion is," Jacob replied without hesitation. "Northern trail's clear." "Yesterday, you said the opposite." Jonah's voice remained neutral, but his eyes held Jacob's steadily. A moment's pause, nearly imperceptible. "Did I? Must have misspoken." Sadie turned from the stove, sensing the undercurrent. "What are you suggesting, Blackwood?" Not suggesting anything. Jonah resumed cleaning his rifle. Just getting facts straight. Later, as thunder rumbled overhead, Jonah caught Jacob slipping outside despite the downpour. Following at a distance, he watched the younger man retrieve something from his saddlebag, a small metal object that gleamed briefly in a flash of lightning. A signal mirror. Jonah waited until Jacob returned inside before checking the saddlebag himself, finding nothing. But beneath Jacob's saddle blanket, tucked securely away, he discovered a folded document bearing Amos Slade's distinctive signature, a deed transfer for the very property they stood upon, already bearing Sadie Kane's forged signature. Returning to the house, Jonah found Sadie alone by the fire, Jacob having retired to the lean-to addition they'd constructed for him. "We need to talk," Jonah said quietly, "about your brother." The look she gave him held all the warmth of a loaded gun. "You're wrong." Sadie's voice barely rose above a whisper, but it cut like steel. "Jacob wouldn't betray me. He's all the family I have left." Rain lashed the windows as Jonah described what he'd seen, the signal mirror, the forged deed. With each word, Sadie's expression hardened from disbelief to fury. "You've been looking for reasons to doubt him since he arrived," she accused, "because he threatens your precious solitude." "This isn't about me," Jonah countered. "It's about survival. If I'm wrong, no harm done. If I'm right—" The cabin door burst open, Jacob framed in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat. His easy smile vanished when he saw their faces, understanding immediately. "She deserves the truth," Jonah said evenly. For a moment, Jacob seemed about to deny everything. Then his shoulders sagged, the facade crumbling like sand. "Slade has my wife," he admitted, voice breaking. "Threatened to kill her if I didn't help him. I'm sorry, Sadie. I didn't have a choice." The confession hung in the air, heavier than the storm outside. Sadie stared at her brother, comprehension dawning slowly, painfully. "There is no wife," she said finally. "You never married." Jacob flinched as though struck. "Sadie, please." "What did he promise you?" she demanded. "Money? Position? Or just your life?" "Both your lives," Jacob whispered. "If you signed the land over willingly, he'd let you leave the territory alive." He looked between them desperately. "You don't know what he's capable of." "We know exactly what he's capable of," Jonah said, touching his rifle. "The question is, what happens now?" A terrible silence fell, broken only by the storm's fury. Then Sadie straightened, something cold and resolved settling over her features. "We stop reacting," she said, eyes never leaving her brother's face. "We stop waiting for Slade to make the next move." She turned to Jonah. "We take the fight to him." Jacob's face paled. "He'll be expecting you now." "I was supposed to signal tonight." "Then he's about to learn what happens when expectations fail," Jonah replied. Millfield's general store had closed for the evening, but a lamp burned in the back room where Eleanor Wilcox nervously arranged chairs around a small table. The shutters were drawn tight, voices kept low, a meeting that couldn't be observed by Slade's watchful eyes. Jonah and Sadie arrived separately, using the alley entrance as instructed. Jacob remained secured at the ranch, bound and watched by Moses Freeman, whose massive presence guaranteed compliance. Trust, once broken, couldn't be restored with mere apologies. "Thank you for coming," Jonah addressed the small gathering. Eleanor, Marshall Grant, and 3 ranchers whose properties depended on the water flowing through Jonah's land. Men with weathered faces and calloused hands, who'd built lives from nothing and now faced losing everything to Slade's schemes. "Never thought I'd risk my badge for a stranger," Marshall Grant said, his weathered face betraying conflict between duty and conscience. "But Slade's gone too far. tried to get me to falsify charges against 3 families this month alone." Eleanor unrolled Moses's map on the table, creek lines tracing blue veins across the territory. "Every marked spot is where Slade plans a dam or diversion. Most landowners don't even know they'll be cut off." "He's bribing the territorial judge," one rancher added, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Arrives next week to sign off on all water rights claims at once." Sadie leaned forward, her bruised throat visible in the lamplight. "We need the original land records, proof that Slade's water trust never owned these waterways before he started forging documents." "Those records are locked in Slade's office," Marshal Grant warned. "Man sleeps with one eye open and a loaded gun beside his pillow." "Then we take them while he's not there," Jonah said quietly. "Tomorrow night, when he meets with his investors from the Eastern Bank." Silence fell as each person weighed the risk against the cost of doing nothing. Finally, Eleanor spoke for them all. "Tell us what you need." Lamplight cast long shadows across the map as they finalized their plan. Marshal Grant marked the location of Slade's office with a pencil X, then indicated positions around the building. 2 guards at night rotating every 3 hours. Door locked, windows barred, but there's a trapdoor access from the cellar of the adjacent building, originally connected when they were both part of the old trading post. Jonah studied the layout. "Who owns that building now?" "Technically the bank," Eleanor replied. "But the bank manager's my sister's son. He'll look the other way for family." Sadie traced the route with her finger. "Once inside, the land registry is kept in a locked cabinet behind Slade's desk. We need the original deeds showing true ownership before Slade's forgeries." "The territorial judge arrives in 5 days," Marshal Grant reminded them. "Whatever we find needs to reach him before Slade does." One of the ranchers, a man named Hollister, with a face creased by sun and worry, spoke up. "My brother rides circuit for the Postal Service. He can get documents to the judge directly, bypass Slade's men completely." Piece by piece, the plan took shape. Eleanor would create a distraction at Slade's investors' dinner. The marshal would ensure his deputy patrolled away from Slade's office. Jonah and Sadie would retrieve the documents while the ranchers positioned themselves as lookouts. "What about your brother?" Marshal Grant asked Sadie. "If he signals Slade—" "He won't," she interrupted firmly. "Moses is watching him. And he knows what happens to traitors in frontier justice." As they finalized details, Jonah found himself studying these people, shopkeepers, ranchers, even the law, all risking everything against a common enemy. The isolation he'd sought for 3 years suddenly seemed hollow compared to the strange strength of standing together. "Dawn day after tomorrow," Jonah confirmed. "We meet at the Ridge Trail and move together." Nods all around. The alliance was sealed. They returned to the ranch well after midnight, the journey made longer by avoiding main trails. The house stood dark and silent against the star-filled sky. Too silent. "Something's wrong," Jonah murmured, drawing his revolver as they approached. The door hung open, moonlight revealing the chaos inside, furniture overturned, supplies scattered. Moses lay unconscious by the fireplace, blood matting his gray hair, his massive chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Of Jacob Kane, there was no sign. "He's alive," Sadie confirmed, checking Moses's pulse. "Hit from behind." The blacksmith's eyes fluttered open, disorientation giving way to urgent clarity. "Kane," he managed, "got loose somehow. Took his horse and headed east. Said he was going to warn Slade." Jonah moved to the window, calculating distances and time. "He's got 3 hours head start. He'll reach Millfield by dawn." "Which means," Slade will be waiting for us, Sadie finished, helping Moses to a sitting position. Our plan is worthless now. For a moment, silence filled the cabin, heavy with the weight of options narrowing to nothing. Then Moses spoke, his deep voice steady despite his injury. Not worthless, just needs changing. He gestured toward the eastern horizon. Slade will expect you tomorrow night when he meets his investors. He won't expect you now. Understanding dawned in Jonah's eyes. We move immediately. Before Jacob reaches him. I'll get word to the others, Moses said, struggling to his feet. Meet you in town, but you too need to ride, now. As they gathered weapons and the few supplies they'd need, Jonah caught Sadie's expression, a mixture of determination and betrayal that mirrored his own internal landscape. Your brother made his choice, he said quietly. And I've made mine, she replied, checking her shotgun with practiced efficiency. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who stands beside you when the shooting starts. They mounted in silence, the ranch house receding behind them as they rode toward a confrontation that couldn't be avoided any longer. Toward Millfield, toward Slade, toward an ending, one way or another. Millfield lay shrouded in pre-dawn darkness, the main street deserted save for a lone dog nosing through discarded scraps. Jonah and Sadie left their horses with Eleanor Wilcox's nephew behind the general store, approaching Slade's office on foot. Despite the hurried change of plans, Marshal Grant had managed to divert the night patrol to the far side of town, buying them precious minutes. Trapdoor should be beneath that storage room, Jonah whispered, as they slipped into the adjacent building, a vacant dry goods store awaiting new ownership. Their lantern cast long shadows across dusty shelves and forgotten merchandise. Sadie moved with quiet efficiency, pushing aside an empty barrel to reveal the outline of a trapdoor in the worn floorboards. Moses said it might be nailed shut. Been a while since Moses was right about something, Jonah replied, lifting the door with surprising ease. Recently used. The passage below was tight, a cramped tunnel connecting the building's cellars, likely dating back to the town's early days when Indian raids were common. They crawled through spider webs and decades of dust, emerging into the stone-walled cellar beneath Slade's office. A single guard dozed in a chair at the top of the stairs, unaware of their approach until Jonah's revolver pressed against his temple. Not a sound, he warned quietly. Just sleep. The guard's hand had barely moved toward his weapon when Jonah's blow rendered him unconscious. They bound and gagged him efficiently, then moved into the office proper. Slade's domain was a testament to his ambition. Expensive furnishings, territorial maps covering one wall with water sources marked in blue ink, and a massive oak desk dominating the room. Behind it stood the cabinet Marshal Grant had described, its brass lock gleaming in the dim light. "I'll watch the street," Sadie murmured, taking position by the window while Jonah approached the cabinet, lockpicks ready. The sound of approaching horses broke the silence, multiple riders moving fast. "Someone's coming," Sadie hissed. "And they're in a hurry." The lock yielded with a satisfying click just as torchlight flickered through the windows. Jonah pulled open the cabinet doors, revealing neat rows of property deeds and water rights documents, the paper empire Slade had built through forgery and intimidation. "It's all here," he confirmed, quickly locating the original deeds with dates and signatures that contradicted Slade's claims. Proof that the Water Trust never owned these lands. Sadie's attention remained fixed on the street. 4 riders, Slade's in front, with Jacob beside him. The betrayal in her voice was a tangible thing, sharp-edged and dangerous. Jonah gathered the incriminating documents, securing them inside his coat as boots sounded on the front porch. Too late to run, he said quietly, positioning himself behind the desk. Might as well face him here. Sadie moved to his side, shotgun ready. Together, then. The door swung open, revealing Amos Slade flanked by his men. Tall and skeletal in the lamplight, his usual calm replaced by cold fury as he took in the scene. The open cabinet, Jonah and Sadie standing their ground, the evidence of his crimes now in their possession. Jacob Kane hovered behind them, unable to meet his sister's gaze. Mr. Blackwood, Slade's voice cut through the silence, and the remarkably difficult to kill Miss Kane, I believe you're trespassing on private property. Hard to trespass on something built on forgery and murder, Jonah replied, his revolver steady. We have the original deeds, Slade, proof that your water claims are fraudulent. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Slade's face before his confidence reasserted itself. Documents can be disputed, witnesses silenced. Dead folk tell no tales at all. He gestured to his men. Kill them both. Retrieve those papers. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. 4 armed men against Jonah and Sadie, with only the massive desk between them. The scales tipped decisively in Slade's favor, a fact reflected in his thin-lipped smile. Until the rear door burst open, revealing Marshal Grant, Moses Freeman, and the 3 ranchers from their meeting, all armed and resolute. "Nobody's killing anyone tonight," the marshal announced, his badge catching the lamplight. "Not in my town." Dawn broke over Millfield as Amos Slade was led from his office in handcuffs, the territorial marshal having been summoned by telegraph. The documents retrieved from Slade's cabinet revealed more than water rights fraud, evidence of bribery, extortion, and conspiracy that would ensure his imprisonment for years to come. Jonah stood on the boardwalk watching as Slade's empire crumbled. The man's former allies suddenly eager to distance themselves from his crimes. Beside him, Sadie observed her brother being escorted to a separate wagon, his cooperation in testifying against Slade buying him passage out of the territory rather than a cell of his own. "Yeah, blood doesn't always run true," Moses Freeman observed, his deep voice rumbling with hard-earned wisdom. "Sometimes the family we choose serves us better than the one we're born to." Jacob met Sadie's gaze one final time before the wagon departed, a silent exchange heavy with regret and recognition that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. "What will you do now?" Marshal Grant asked, joining them as the town began stirring to life around them. "That land's officially yours, Blackwood, water rights and all." The question hung in the air, weighted with possibilities. 3 weeks ago, Jonah had arrived seeking isolation, a place to hide from his past. Now he stood surrounded by allies who had fought beside him, property that represented not just ownership, but responsibility to the community depending on its water. "Rebuild the barn first," he answered finally. "Then maybe plant something that grows higher than the weeds." His eyes met Sadie's, the question unspoken but clear between them. "I hear there's a saloon for sale in town," she said, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. "But I suppose someone needs to make sure you don't bungle that barn raising." The morning sun caught the creek water as they rode back toward the ranch, the land stretching before them, unmarred by fear or deception for the first time. Not just property now, but possibility. Not merely earth and water, but something approaching home. "Takes more than a hanging to kill some people," Jonah observed quietly. "And more than a betrayal to break them," Sadie replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon where their land waited, neither forsaken nor merely survived, but reclaimed. The gallows land had witnessed blood and treachery, but now it would see something new, hope. Well, partner, we've traveled a dusty trail together through the gallows land. If your heart feels a bit raw from witnessing Jonah and Sadie's struggles, the betrayal, violence, and hard-won redemption, I understand completely. Their journey from isolated survivors to reluctant allies to something deeper speaks to something fundamental in all of us. The Dakota Territory of 1878 may seem distant, but it strips away our modern pretenses to reveal timeless truths. Jonah spent 3 years running from his past, believing one failure had defined him forever. Yet redemption isn't about erasing our mistakes. It's about finding the courage to make different choices when tested again. And we all face such tests, don't we? Those moments when we must choose between safety and principle, between self-preservation and standing for others. What strikes me most about Jonah and Sadie's story is how isolation nearly destroyed them both, while connection ultimately saved them. We're not meant to carry our burdens alone, especially the weight of past mistakes. Sadie didn't just need Jonah's protection, she gave him something to believe in again. The land they fought for became more than property. It became possibility, a future worth defending. The struggles of frontier justice may seem remote, but the choice between courage and comfort remains as relevant as tomorrow's sunrise. We may not face corrupt land barons or debt collectors with guns, but we all encounter moments that test our character. The workplace compromise that violates our ethics, the friend who needs difficult truth, the stranger whose need costs us something precious. In the end, Jonah and Sadie learned what the frontier always taught those brave enough to listen. We're not defined by our worst moments, but by what we do after them. Second chances aren't given, they're claimed, one difficult choice at a time. Thank you for riding this trail with me. Stories only truly live when they find readers willing to invest their hearts in flawed characters trying to become better. Your willingness to follow Jonah and Sadie from that gallows tree to their hard-won home is what transforms mere words into something that matters. This story got me thinking about those moments that define us, crossroads where we choose between what's easy and what's right. We all carry regrets, and we all face times when doing the honorable thing costs more than we think we can afford. What's the hardest choice you've ever made to do what you believed was right? Consider sharing your story, because real courage deserves to be honored, whether it happened on the frontier or in your own backyard. If Jonah and Sadie's journey toward redemption stirred something in your spirit, perhaps there's value in exploring more tales of the West. These stories remind us that throughout history, ordinary people have found extraordinary courage when their backs were against the wall. Until next time, may your trails be clear and your conscience even clearer.